All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2022 International Fuel Ethanol Workshop and Expo. That is, of course, the long and very formal name of the conference most of us just call the FEW. You gotta shorten it up in this industry. Everything's efficient, so we just shorten it up. We accept a lot of different names for this show. We had one guy a couple years ago that just called it the W. Just see you next year at the W. We love that kind of stuff. Lots of different names. Old timers call it the workshop. Very nostalgic. It's a 38-year-old show. We like that too. You folks from Minnesota, there's lots of people with Norwegian heritage here. Kind of a penchant for brevity. You guys like to shorten it up too. You've reduced our 3-letter acronym to a 1-syllable word. For you, a lot of you anyway, it's just the few, which is kind of, I gotta admit, kind of a breach of our trademark protocol. Our marketing people work year-round to make sure everyone in this industry knows that this conference is the largest ethanol event in the world. We try to market as big and bold and bustling, crazy, and then I get here on site and inevitably the first guy I run into is like, hey Tom, pretty good few. Pretty good few, this is the largest ethanol conference in the world. But that's great too. And I was thinking about this last week, trying to warm up to the idea of, after all these years, of the idea of this conference being called the few. And I started thinking about other contexts that word or phrase is used. And the first thing that came to mind is the Marines, right? Not to compare us to Marines by any means, but the few, the proud. And in that context, the few is a reference to the exceptional, the most capable, the hardest working, and at times the essential. And that sounded pretty familiar. And so I got thinking that the few is probably a pretty good way, pretty good name for this conference. So from now on, when I run into that guy in the trade show that says he's having a pretty good few, I'm not gonna try to correct him. I'm gonna take it as a compliment. I'm gonna take it as a reference to all of you, and especially the few hundred producers at this show. We actually have more than 500 producers at this show that collectively produce over 16 billion gallons of the best low-carbon biofuel on the planet. I'm gonna take it as a reference to the few hundred exhibitors at this week's show that are on the sold-out trade show floor, that are among the best vendors that any industry could really ask for, and I mean that. Very dedicated group of companies. And I'm going to take it as a reference to the few hundred speakers at this show who collectively produce such wonderful presentations that add an enormous amount of richness and value to this annual event. So, I guess the few is not only, grammatically correct, but it's also fitting. I want to first this morning take a moment and thank our sponsors. We had Fagen Inc. sponsor our breakfast. Fagen is one of those iconic companies in the industry. Really almost doesn't need to market it themselves. Don't tell them, we appreciate their support. But Fagen Inc. Sponsored our breakfast, helped us get fueled up for what is sure to be a busy morning. Our general session sponsor this morning is Thermal Kinetics. Thermal Kinetics is an RCM engineering company, and we are so grateful that they are once again sponsoring this opening morning general session. We've got a whole lot in store this morning. We've got Emily Skor, Todd Becker, Bruce Rastetter, our policy panel. As I said, more than 500 producers in attendance. What a gathering this is going to be. The producers on site represent over 90% of the installed production capacity in the country. We also have, in addition to ethanol producers, quite a number of biodiesel producers, renewable diesel producers, RNG, SAF, lots of different producer types. The lion's share of our producers are ethanol, but over the years, more and more of the other types of producers are coming to our show, and we're very excited about that. For a word from our sponsor, Thermal Kinetics, please welcome to the stage Thermal Kinetics Vice President of Business Development and Marketing, Marcos Villegas.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be here, and I'm going to tell you briefly a personal story. So I was born and raised in a country where fuel ethanol was part of our daily lives as fuel. Cars were designed to run on 100% ethanol. So my first car was a green Volkswagen Passat, And you think, what does the green Volkswagen Passat have to do with anything in this conference? I said, today I'm proud, after many years being in this beautiful and vast country, to be representing a company that is a leader and provides technology that enabled my fuel ethanol car, 100% fuel ethanol car. So I would be honored to just receive you if you have any opportunities to stop at our booth. We at Thermokinetics are a leader and a provider of distillation, dehydration, and evaporation to this industry, alongside with many other industries, including the sustainable aviation fuel. So if you'd like to talk to us, have any problems, I would welcome you to stop by our booth 621. Thank you very much. Tom?
All right, thank you, Marcos, and thank you, Thermokinetics, for once again sponsoring our opening session. We really appreciate it. A few months ago, I was interviewing a ethanol producer from the Central Valley of California, and a producer that also produces biodiesel and RNG, actually. Very interesting plant, very unique and efficient. And as we were talking about that, I asked the general manager to expound on their efficiency, and the first company he mentioned was Thermokinetics. He just raved about the system they had installed at the plant a few years back and how it had become the centerpiece of their efficiency platform. So good stuff. And it was nice because I could actually put a face with that company, and I said, hey, they sponsor the general session at the FEW. I know who they are. That was cool. The kind of efficiency gains that Marcos and his company offer to producers are exactly the type of thing that are helping this industry take our carbon intensity levels lower and lower. Those efficiencies, coupled with carbon capture and sequestration, which we'll hear more about this morning, and we hope improved agricultural carbon accounting, that trifecta, if you will certainly help us bring our carbon intensity levels even lower than they already are to ultra-low levels in the future, potentially net zero in the decades ahead. That's going to be important, not only so we can compete against electric vehicles on the ground, but so we can provide ethanol as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel in the air. A few weeks ago, there was a big announcement made by a startup company in this industry called SAFFiRE Renewables, which has received funding, partnership with Southwest Airlines and matching funding from the Department of Energy to pursue sustainable aviation fuel at pilot scale, then later at larger scale, that is derived from or will be derived from corn stover-based cellulosic ethanol. It's an exciting project, it's bold, it's ambitious, it's very, very promising. And for a few words on this, please welcome to the stage SAFFiRE Renewables CEO Mark Yancey and Southwest Airlines Senior Director of Fuel Supply Chain Management, Michael Abushan.
Right up here. Thanks, Tom. And good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to introduce you to SAFFiRE Renewables. I'll go back and start about 1.5 years ago when NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, contacted D3 Max and asked us if we would help them commercialize their alkaline pretreatment technology. Pretreatment is typically the first step in converting biomass to ethanol and other biofuels via fermentation. We reviewed the NREL technology and concluded that it could solve the problems that we've seen in the past with dilute acid pretreatment used in past Gen 2 ethanol plants. We agreed to work with NREL. Together, we assembled a project team and submitted a proposal to BETO's 2021 Scale-Up Funding Opportunity Announcement. We were successful, being the only applicant to receive an award for a pilot-scale SAF project. Thanks to Mike Himmel, who's my co-principal investigator at NREL, We named our DOE project SAFFiRE. That stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel from Renewable Ethanol. Project SAFFiRE will design, build, and operate a 10-ton per day corn stovered ethanol pilot plant. One of our team members, LanzaJet, will then upgrade the ethanol to SAF. Earlier this year, D3 Max created SAFFiRE Renewables to hold the NREL background intellectual property as well as new IP we expect to develop during Project SAFFiRE. 2 weeks ago, we announced that Southwest Airlines has invested in SAFFiRE Renewables and would join the Project SAFFiRE team. We're extremely honored to be working with Southwest as one of the largest jet fuel users in the U.S. Their input from the fuel user perspective will be extremely valuable for our project. If you'd like to learn more about Project SAFFiRE and SAFFiRE Renewables, please attend the 1:30 session of the Biodiesel and Renewable Diesel Summit today in room 200 BC. Now I'd like to introduce Michael Abishan, Senior Director of Fuel Supply Chain Management at Southwest Airlines, to say a few words.
Good morning, and thanks, Mark, for your friendship and your partnership, and thanks also to Tom Bryan, Joe Bryan, and everyone at D3 Max and BBI. So some of you might be asking, why is an airline here? And it's a really good question. We're here because we share your values. Doing right by doing good is part of the Southwest DNA. It's been a part of our DNA for the 51 years we've been in existence. We focused on environmental sustainability because it's the right thing to do. These are our values. We're a Texas-based airline. Those are Texas values. Those are Midwestern values, and so that's why we're here. Last October, we launched our 10-year environmental sustainability plan and provided milestones to make progress to our ultimate goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Part of this plan is to replace 10% of our total jet fuel consumption with sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, by 2030. We recognize the critical role SAF plays in decarbonizing the very hard to decarbonize aviation sector and the challenges that everyone faces in scaling SAF that is cost competitive and that has low carbon intensity on a life cycle basis compared to conventional jet fuel. Our estimated 2030 annual jet fuel consumption is 2.8 billion gallons. That's a lot. That's where SAFFiRE comes in, and that's where you come in. Our investment into SAFFiRE Renewables was the first investment by Southwest Airlines outside of an acquisition in our 51 years of existence. That should tell you our level of commitment to SAFFiRE and our commitment to this project and its success. If this pilot project is successful, or should I say when this pilot project is successful, right, Mark? When this project is successful and SAFFiRE's technology is commercialized, we estimate significant quantities of renewable ethanol can be produced that can be upgraded via the alcohol-to-jet pathway into significant quantities of SAF. How significant, you ask? Well, we estimate that the commercialization of SAFFiRE's IP could help facilitate the replacement of about 5% of Southwest jet fuel with SAF by around the year 2030. That's half of our 10% replacement goal. By 2040, this technology could produce 7.5 billion gallons of SAF. It's possible. And that would not only be game-changing for Southwest Airlines, it would also be game-changing for the entire airline industry. So hopefully I've piqued your interest with that. But to learn more, please come by Mark's session at 1:30 in the Biodiesel and Renewable Diesel Summit, today in room 200 BC, and please drop by the SAFFiRE booth. We'll be spending some time there in the Expo Hall. Honored to be with you all today here at FEW. I look forward to meeting you all and to working with you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. All right, thanks, guys. The airline guys always want to take their picture with me. I don't know what it is. It's just magazine editors are like celebrities to those guys. Thank you, Mark and Michael, for coming up and talking a little bit about SAFFiRE Renewables. It's very exciting. As the guys said, the announcement was made a couple weeks ago. I listened to the live stream announcement when Southwest Airlines CEO was at a airline fuel conference in Washington, D.C. To make that announcement. And as he spoke about the volumes, which Michael and Mark both mentioned, that the airlines need and desire in the years ahead, it really caught my attention. We're talking 10, 15 billion gallons eventually. This could be a market, in my opinion, someday as big as the E10 market currently is right now. So very promising, and as we look to provide fuel for that hard to electrify market in the years ahead, this could be a big part of our future. Also, a big part of our future is our young people. Helping out young people, aspiring young professionals and students has always been important to BBI. It was something that was very important to our late company founder, Bryan, who cared so deeply about the future of this industry. Each year here at the FEW, we give out two $2,000 scholarships to either the family member of an ethanol production company or an ethanol plant employee themselves. This year we've chosen two kids of ethanol production companies. Our first scholarship winner is John Arant, who is the son of Jennifer Arant Pilgrim, who works for Marquis Management. John will be attending Harvard this fall, and I believe playing lacrosse there. So he's a student athlete. We're happy to help him get started at Harvard. Our other scholarship winner is Mallory Cole, whose mom, Marcy Cole, works at Glacial Lakes Energy in Watertown, South Dakota. Mallory is going to attend college in state, I believe, in South Dakota. I don't know if she's playing sports at the university, but she was a heck of a figure skater and a singer in her high school days, and so we're just thrilled to support her and John. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, so I began my talk today talking about the few. You probably remember that just a few minutes ago. I did so in the context of the exceptional, the best, the hardest working, as a reference to all of you. But when it comes to our longest serving, most dedicated and most impactful industry professionals, I would add to that list of characteristics the most dedicated, the most engaged, the most visionary, diligent, trusted. Those kind of words describe the people that have won our FEW annual awards for the last 20 years, the High Octane Award and the Award of Excellence. We believe, and I know a lot of you agree, that these are two of the more prestigious accolades in all of ethanol, not only because they're given out here at the FEW, but because they are awards that are based on nominations of one's peers, and the winners are ultimately selected by a group of all the previous award winners over the past 20 years, most of which are still around and in the industry, as well as the members of our Ethanol Producer Magazine editorial board. I didn't mention, but I'm also the editor of Ethanol Producer Magazine, and it's a real honor to have such a dedicated board that helps us not only with magazine ideas, but with things like this. So thank you. First this morning, we will present the High Octane Award. This award is given to a person who has helped the industry progress over the years. Sometimes it's given to a market builder. Sometimes it's given to someone who is just engaged in one of our most ardent advocates, someone who has helped the industry grow. Sometimes it's just given to people that have inordinately given up their time and talents to our cause, our associations, and have just been a good friend to so many people. This year's High Octane Award winner is a 40-year veteran of the ethanol industry. When we talked last week, he told me about the somewhat unusual circumstances of how he got involved with ethanol, and I said, before he got started, I said, was it like serendipity? And he said, oh, Tom, I think it was a lot deeper than that. And I'll let him tell some of that story if he'd like. He began his career in 1982 at a 1 million gallon ethanol plant in Portz, New Mexico. I don't want to spoil any stories, but he walked into that plant with his carpenter's tool bag and his degree in divinity, not knowing anything about ethanol, and turned kind of an unusual moment into a lifelong career. It's been quite a journey for this New Mexico native who eventually moved up to Minnesota, took over a 10 million gallon ethanol plant in southern Minnesota, and together with his team and with the help of some really good vendors in this industry, a lot of good companies, expanded, debottlenecked, brought that plant from 10, 13, 15, 30, and eventually 50 million gallons, and then in 2017 undertook a major expansion, 70 million gallons, bringing the total to 130 million gallons. So it's just fascinating that he went from a 1 million gallon a year plant to 130 million gallons in his career. Pretty cool. He also was a founding member of the RPMG marketing group, Renewable Products Marketing Group, which markets ethanol for 19 ethanol plants and some 2 billion gallons. So quite one of those visionaries who saw that as a very good idea. In addition to that, he served as chairman of the Renewable Fuels Association from 2016 to 2016, among many other posts. In the words of one of his nominators, he's been a leader driving the modern ethanol industry since its beginning in the 1980s, while guiding his plant to great success. He has been a steadfast counsel, mentor, friend to so many people in this industry for decades, from New Mexico to Minnesota to Sacramento to Washington, D.C. He made his presence felt as he drove marketing innovations like RPMG and led organizations, including the RFA, to promote policies that would benefit ethanol producers, the communities they served, that, who would put ethanol in front of people at the gas pump. There is simply no person more deserving of this honor. Another friend said, in almost 20 years in and around the ethanol industry, I've never met anyone who is as passionate and as articulate as he is when it comes to telling ethanol's story. His wealth of knowledge about this history, the history of our industry and its development, is unparalleled, and he loves nothing more than to share his stories and experience with others. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for his belief in this industry, his enthusiasm for what it's all about, his advocacy, his defense of ethanol when needed, and all the behind-the-scenes support and guidance and advice that he's lent to his friends and colleagues over the years, the 2022 High Octane Award goes to the very recently retired Alcorn Clean Fuel CEO, Randy Doyle.
Wow, what do you say after all that? Well, part of the story was that I stumbled into the ethanol industry. I hired on to be a carpenter, and the first day they made me a cooker. And I've been in the industry ever since. It was like a calling. And even the way I wound up in Minnesota was definitely divine intervention. God has a plan, and I don't consider myself an environmentalist, but a steward. And that's what's so wonderful about this industry. You know, the characteristics of stewardship I see over and over and over again in all of you folks who want to do more, use less, do it better, use less energy, find new products. And probably the one thing that makes this so exciting to me is that we work together, we collaborate. That's the neatest thing about this industry. You know, you've got friends everywhere, and they'll help. You know, you sometimes have a good idea, and sometimes a stupid idea. And you need somebody to tell you that. And there are folks out there who can do that and help, and you work together, and everybody does better. You know, that's what makes this so much fun. There's so much to learn, and we continue to grow and change and do it better. Folks, this is a wonderful, exciting industry. God bless you all, and thank you for this award and for giving me a home for all this time. Thank you.
All right, congratulations, Randy, and very poignant words, as usual. Randy and I, when we talked a couple weeks ago, when I told him he had won the award, I I didn't really understand that he was retiring so soon, and I said, so when are you heading out? Is it like a few months or end of the year? And he goes, Tuesday. So it was, I don't know if it was Tuesday, but it was like the next day. So I said, wow. But if there's anyone who will kind of be around, I know he's going to do a little bit of consulting and stay active in the industry and provide his advice where it's needed. It's Randy. He'll be around. I remember, just really quickly, I toured his plant like 20 years ago by myself as a young reporter, and Randy's taken so many people through his plant, he probably doesn't remember this, but was really patient with me. Took me around the whole plant. I didn't know anything about ethanol, and showed me the plant. And if my memory serves, because I tell this story sometimes, tell me if this is correct, Randy, but I remember him showing me the thermal oxidizer, and they were kind of new at the time, and he said, this is the device that kind of gets rid of emissions, and it's really totally reduced the odor in the plant. And I said, well, that's terrific. And he said, I kind of miss the smell. Does that sound accurate? And that just kind of describes Randy, just immersed in the plant and just loves the plant and even the smell. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we will present the Award of Excellence, which recognizes a person who's made more technical contributions to this industry. Although I got to admit, this year's winner was actually nominated for the High Octane Award and could have won that award as well. He's such a great guy, but we felt like his technical contributions were more fitting, so we moved him over to that category. This award goes to people sometimes in research, sometimes in engineering. We've given it to economists, business analysts, and I'd say this year's winner, who's a certified public accountant, falls kind of into that latter category. He grew up on a Minnesota farm, where he still lives, near Willmar, Minnesota, the place where he founded his accounting firm 40 years ago. And after attending the University of Minnesota, went there for a business degree, came out with an accounting degree, got his CPA, set up a one-man shop, and eventually grew that firm into what it is today, a nearly 100-person full-service accounting and business advisory firm based right here in Minnesota. In those early days in the 80s, our award winner gained a lot of experience working with farmers who, during the farm crisis, were going through some pretty tough times. So he saw a lot, learned a lot, made a lot of connections that eventually helped him better serve the ethanol producers that would come his way later. He first worked with the folks at Chippewa Valley Ethanol Company, which, no kidding, was the first ethanol plant I ever toured. So I think Elkhorn was the second or third, and Chippewa Valley was the first. But I know Chippewa Valley Ethanol, CVEC, you folks at CVEC and the people that used to work there have heard that so many times, because I think CVEC provided a lot of first opportunities for a lot of people, including our award winner. That business, that work, helping them get their co-op started and get the plant built, led to a lot more work in ethanol. Eventually, his team grew. They developed innovative solutions for the industry, software, enterprise software called Int'l that eventually was branded as Beyond. Many of you are familiar with that software. It's prolific in the industry, used in some 80 ethanol plants today. They eventually developed so many services, it's tough to name them all, but the one a lot of us think of this firm for is their benchmarking program. Again, very prolific, used all across the industry to help plants compare their performance, both financially and operationally, to their peers. He credits a lot of this, most of it, to the people he's hired. He says you got to hire smart people, and I agree. But he created the culture and the environment and set the expectations that made it all happen over 35 years. He has now moved on from a managing partner at his firm to director, but is still involved. He serves on the Minnesota Biofuels, Governor's Minnesota Biofuels Council, which is working hard on a clean fuels policy, and he is a current board member of the American Coalition for Ethanol. In the words of his nominator, this year's award winner was truly instrumental in the development of the first dry mill ethanol plants in Minnesota. In the early days, it was common for him to get on an airplane with people like Ron Fagan to meet with a group of that are interested in building an ethanol plant. He may not have known where he was going or when he'd come home, but he got on that plane knowing that, being a farmer himself, knowing that it would have such a strong impact on the region around him. And so he went and he did all he could to help grow this industry. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for his 3 decades, 4 really, 3 in ethanol, probably 4 in agriculture, 5 maybe farming, for all his years and his work helping to advance ethanol from its early days on, for helping ethanol producers do better in good times and survive the worst of times, and for helping them understand where they're at in between, and for hiring really smart people. This year's Award of Excellence goes to John Christensen of Christensen PLLP.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, BBI, for sponsoring this very important conference for our industry. I'm extremely appreciative and humbled by this award. I also consider this a privilege to be on the same stage with a legend, Mr. Randy Doyle. He has inspired me over the years, and I've always appreciated his counsel. This award is something that's not me alone, and as Tom mentioned, this award is, there are many people that are really involved in this award. And first of all, I'd like to say, I want to say thanks as part of this to my wife, who's here with me today. Ann is here, and with her support, and she hasn't had a chance to attend a lot of conferences or the opportunity to, but she hears a lot about ethanol at every at the dinner table and those areas. So thank you for the journey. I also want to thank, be remiss, is the team that Tom spoke about. And it's the Christensen team, the Beyond team, and the benchmarking team. These people are passionate to innovate for this industry every day. And they're the ones that really have made all this happen, the things that we do. And so that's what really has propelled all of us. I've had the opportunity to work in the industry for many years, and I don't consider it work because I enjoy going to work every day. And the reason I enjoy it, and I think the reason that the industry has such a great future, is because of the people, and the people that this industry is made of character, passion, the values. Randy brought up the value of the values that this industry has are important and are really what makes this industry going forward. We're working for the right reasons to help our communities and help our country. And I think our country's never needed our industry more than it does right now. And so I think that's why the future is bright. So thank you very much. I consider all of you my friends, and have a great conference.
All right, congratulations, John. You know, as John and I talked last week as well, he was talking about all the different services that they developed over the years at Christensen, and I was reminded that our own company, my dad sitting in the front row, founded our company, BBI International, and we had a lot of services at one time that overlapped with John's company, consulting, feasibility work, project development, and John was talking about that, and it got me thinking about how gracious Christensen, and I think that comes from John, always was, even to us as a competitor. We're not in that business really anymore, and probably because John crushed us, maybe. But no, but he was always so gracious and never made us feel like a competitor, but a collaborator. So that's the kind of company Christensen is. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for me to get off the stage and let the experts take over. I'm thrilled to have Emily Skor back with us after 4 years. I can't believe it's been 4 years, but because of the pandemic, she spoke virtually 2 years ago at our virtual FEW, and then before that it was 2018, so it's been 4 years since she's been on the stage here at the FEW. As most of you know, Emily Skor is CEO of Growth Energy. She's been so for a number of years. She leads the association, which represents 89 producers, 94 associate companies, and tens of thousands of ethanol supporters around the country who work to bring consumers cleaner burning, more affordable choices at the pump. Earlier this year, Emily and her team of course, have worked so hard to secure year-round E15. I think that was a big win, at least temporarily, getting that done for our industry as we work at a state-by-state level to secure E15 year-round permanently. That was a big victory, very effective, and Emily and her team were a big part of it. The RVO numbers just recently came out. I think Emily will be talking about this. I would say that is another huge success that she's been a part of. Just enormous restoration of gallons, 15 billion conventional. A lot of the things we wanted in that RVO, we got. And a lot of that came from the work that Emily and her team are doing. Another thing that they have been instrumental in doing and will continue to do is being guardians of the RFS and making sure that after 2022, after this year, that the RFS doesn't fall off a cliff. It doesn't go away, but we need people like Emily reminding the administration and the EPA that that's the case. Please welcome to the stage Growth Energy CEO, Emily Skor.
Oh, we are. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, BBI. Good morning, everyone. How about another round of applause for Randy and John? As Tom said, it has been 4 years since I have been up on the podium talking with you. It is so good to be back in person. I see familiar faces. I see a few new faces, so thank you for joining. And aren't we glad to be finally back in person? Minneapolis is once again bustling with biofuel leaders of all stripes, swapping stories, sharing innovation, and celebrating the growing breadth and diversity of this magnificent industry. And of course, welcome to the Twin Cities, my hometown. I hope you really do enjoy the week here. Being with you here is a very welcome break from Washington. After a year and a half of legislative battles, policymakers are already turning their attention to the fast approaching midterm elections, and I assure you, energy is center stage. It was only a few months ago that easing COVID restrictions led to a sharp rise in travel and an uptick in fuel demand. Then Russia invaded Ukraine, throwing energy and agriculture markets right back into turmoil. Consumers were already facing historically high fuel prices prior to the invasion. Add in the ban on Russian crude and instability in the global marketplace, and gas prices unsurprisingly continued to soar to new heights. These economic side effects stemming from the conflict in Ukraine were a rude awakening for those policymakers who had become complacent about U.S. energy security. Leaders on the left and the right were forced to agree that the U.S. economy is still painfully vulnerable to foreign influence. So when U.S. officials initially focused on oil supplies, we injected E15 into the conversation. I'm hydrating because it's going to be in the high 90s today, you guys. Everybody should be doing that. Bioethanol was trading at least $1 below unfinished gasoline, and E15 was the surest way to help more consumers tap into those savings. As gas prices ticked up week after week, consumers were saving as much as 60 cents per gallon with E15. Not only do biofuels help with the family pocketbook, we offer a sustainable supply chain that starts and stops on U.S. soil. That's the message we carried through to leaders in Washington. At our side were key champions in Congress, fighting to ensure that outdated summer fuel restrictions wouldn't interrupt E15 sales. In fact, Minnesota's own Amy Klobuchar joined her neighbor to the west, South Dakota Senator John Thune, in leading bipartisan calls for President Biden to curb costs at the pump and displace Russian oil imports with biofuels. Those efforts were backed by champions like Secretary Tom Vilsack, Congresswoman Cindy Axne, and other tireless supporters at every turn promoting American biofuels as a key solution to the energy crisis. The White House listened. And earlier this spring, I was honored to join some of you at Poet Menlo in Iowa, where President Biden announced his administration would issue an emergency waiver for 2022 summer's driving season, offering drivers uninterrupted access to lower-cost E15. It was a major win for American drivers and our nation's energy security, promoting cleaner options at the pump and a stronger rural economy. But as you know, we are not done. The EPA emergency waiver applies only to this summer's driving season. And Growth Energy is working hand in hand with our retail partners and stakeholders to demand a permanent fix so drivers can continue to access lower-cost E15 in the summers to come. Of course, that doesn't mean individual states need to wait around for Washington to solve our energy challenges. In fact, 9 governors, thank you Ohio, it was 8, now it's 9, have already formally requested that their states be allowed to establish a level playing field for E15 in the summertime. And while we don't want E15 to become a niche or a regional fuel, these 9 states represent approximately 60% of current E15 retailers and 14% of total US fuel demand. You couple that with the RFG market, we've got nearly 39% of the fuel market selling E15 year-round. And once we get California, that's nearly 50%. We can grow with 50% year-round access while we continue to work toward our goal. And states are doing even more to drive growth. Last month, our industry secured a big win on E15 when Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signed the 2022 Biofuel Access Bill, guaranteeing statewide consumer access to the blend by 2026. This landmark legislation is a testament to the leadership of rural communities in building a clean energy future, and we look forward to replicating that victory throughout the Midwest. Now, that kind of progress, even in Iowa, it doesn't come easily. Success was only possible thanks to the tireless efforts of our entire community, local plants, farmers, suppliers, customers, and advocacy organizations, who all joined hands to press their local officials. And it is that same unified, collaborative approach that will secure victories in other key markets. But to build on our momentum, we need to remind policymakers that we are more than just an affordable alternative to Russian oil. Savings at the pump, that got us this summer of E15. But it is our role in a low-carbon future that will open markets in 2023 and beyond. And as President Biden said during his remarks at Menlo, you simply cannot get to net zero 2050 without biofuels. And even if the next election heralds in a swing in political leadership in the House or Senate, many of the most immediate and impactful decisions on our top priorities, the renewable fuel standard, trade, infrastructure, and more, will remain firmly in the hands of an executive branch focused on climate. As we know, biofuels have always been and will continue to be a bipartisan clean energy solution. Just like those on the left, our champions on the right are eager to connect with a growing share of voters who care about clean energy, so long as it's affordable, reliable, and made in America. Oil disciples and EV evangelists have loyal followers. But where ideology confronts reality, that is where biofuels emerge as the clear solution for clean and affordable liquid fuel available right now for today's vehicles. That's why we must continue to broadcast our innovation. Think of the advancements we've made just in the past decade. We are at the leading edge of a bioeconomy offering transformative solutions to leaders around the world. That's true for cars, and it's true for emissions-heavy industries that are more difficult to decarbonize. For example, a Growth Energy member, Clear Flame Engine Technologies, is shaking up the freight industry with technology allowing diesel trucks to run purely on renewable fuels like bioethanol. That same biofuel-led innovation is on display in the aviation sector. With current technologies, farm-based feedstocks like bioethanol and corn oil are the only source of clean, renewable energy available in large enough volumes to meet projected demand for sustainable aviation fuel. And a group of Growth Energy members, ADM and Marquis Energy, have already pledged to produce by 2025 20% of the administration's SAF goal for this decade. But production will need to ramp up quickly, and for that, we need market eligibility and economic viability. That's why our team is working harder than ever to ensure SAF incentives harness the full emissions reduction potential of U.S. biofuels. At the same time, we're pushing to ensure that America's biorefineries can capitalize on new federal incentives, including the proposed Clean Fuel Production Tax Credit and an expanded 45Q carbon capture and sequestration tax credit, originally proposed in last year's Build Back Better legislation. For years, our industry has pioneered the capture of carbon, delivering food-grade CO2 needed to make beverages, package meat, safely refrigerate vaccines. CO2 shortages during the pandemic put that leadership in the spotlight, and we've been taking full advantage of the attention to educate policymakers and voters about all the ways this industry is driving the expansion of a low-carbon bioeconomy. In 2021 alone, we purchased nearly $30 billion worth of U.S. corn. Those bushels aren't just a feedstock for bioethanol. They provide renewable building blocks for an ever-growing array of value-added products, such as high-protein animal feed, renewable chemicals, and corn oil. And with each passing year, we're bringing down the carbon intensity of those products with new efficiencies, better science, and ongoing investment. With today's technology, this industry can reach net zero and even negative carbon emissions. Every plant is calibrating and optimizing, whether that's tapping into a proposed carbon pipeline, test wells for sequestration, or seeking renewable energy sources like solar and biomass to power the biorefineries. Our commitment to continuous progress is even opening a new world of opportunity for climate-friendly agriculture. Earlier this year, I participated in USDA's 98th Agricultural Outlook Forum, where we discussed how demand for low-carbon feedstocks can unlock incentives for our farmers to voluntarily invest in sustainable practices and further drive down carbon intensity. We can help bring agriculture into our national climate strategy. But to advance that leadership, we cannot let regulators undervalue the investments and improvements we're making, from kernel fiber bioethanol to regenerative farm practices. Nor can we allow critics to discount the innovations that allow us to ramp up production year after year while reducing our environmental footprint. We see it around every new biofuel victory. Critics come out of the woodwork with misinformation designed to obscure the value of renewable fuels. And it was no different after this year's E15 emergency waiver announcement. Opponents spouted the same bogus claims we've heard before about emissions, land use, even food prices. And just as in the past, we worked hard to correct the record, and we will continue to correct and combat misinformation at every turn. Fortunately, you know the facts are on our side. That's where we must stay vigilant and take every opportunity to showcase the environmental benefits of homegrown bioethanol. Benefits backed by researchers at Argonne, EPA, USDA, California Air Resources Board, and a host of other leaders in life cycle modeling. The latest science has bioethanol reaching a nearly 50% carbon advantage over gasoline, and that advantage continues to improve with industry innovation. And the very latest research from UC Riverside shows that E15 delivers a statistically significant reduction on carbon monoxide and harmful particulates when compared to E10, underscoring once again that more bioethanol is key to cleaner air. This low-carbon fuel has been one of the largest generators of credits in low-carbon markets, and it is essential that as discussions on these policies continue in California, Oregon, Washington, Canada, and elsewhere, we keep our seat at the table so that higher blends remain the linchpin of new climate strategies. Make no mistake, these are the considerations that will determine the direction of U.S. energy policy, including a fast-approaching, never-done-before review of the RFS. We cannot deliver on emissions or rural jobs without more low-carbon biofuels. And it is vital EPA recognize that reality as they work on a new rule, the SET, that picks up where Congress left off and establishes multi-year requirements for 2023 and beyond. Fortunately, as Tom mentioned, we are heading into that fight from a position of strength thanks to the major victory on the new RVOs set by EPA earlier this month. Granted, the requirements for 2020 and 2021 did not address the full suite of concerns raised by our champions. But we did take home the most important prize, and this is important. Strong 2022 volumes with a conventional biofuel blending requirement set at a full 15 billion gallons. The agency also restored the first 250 million gallons that had been illegally waived in the 2016 RVOs. And finally, it halted all improper small refinery exemptions, a move that should finally provide a level of certainty to the entire fuel supply chain. Taken together, these actions demonstrated EPA's commitment to getting the RFS back on track and underscored the critical role biofuels play and will continue to play in mitigating climate change and lowering prices at the pump. Of course, the RFS only sets the floor for growth, not the ceiling. That's why our team will continue to mobilize our champions and fan out across Capitol Hill to fight for the policies we need to unleash the full potential of this industry. High on that docket are the clean fuel and carbon capture tax credits I mentioned earlier. Also on the list are infrastructure investments we need to ensure that higher blends are available in every U.S. market. We helped insert these items into the White House's original Build Back Better legislation. And while the bill has stalled in Congress, it remains a key starting point for all subsequent negotiations. No matter what happens in the next several months, energy will remain firmly at the top of the congressional agenda. And Growth Energy remains committed to ensuring that biofuels are recognized as a cost-effective solution that can deliver immediate impact. The same goes for negotiations in the international arena. In China, Brazil, India, South Korea, and beyond, we are working with U.S. diplomats to ensure that bioethanol is front and center in every conversation on global carbon reduction goals. In the wake of the war in Ukraine, U.S. policymakers aren't the only ones looking to break old patterns of reliance on expensive fossil fuels. But that doesn't ease the pressure to also advance climate and decarbonization goals. Only exports of U.S. bioethanol can deliver on both fronts, a message I'm looking forward to delivering on a trade mission to Japan with the U.S. Grains Council next month. And some recent long-awaited moves by the administration should help position us for continued success on the international front. With two recent and key nominations, Alexis Taylor as USDA Trade Undersecretary and Doug McCaleb as the Agricultural Ambassador for the U.S. Trade Representative. Together, these two will lead U.S. government agriculture trade policy. Both have decades of experience in agriculture and a deep appreciation of the critical role biofuels play in the global economy and supply chain. And whether it's E20 in India, or E10 in the UK, or E3 in Japan, or E15 here at home, every new market offers another chance to introduce a new generation of drivers to bioethanol. We already offer savings at the pump, and that is very attractive for many, many drivers. But no matter what is happening in the boom and bust cycle of oil prices, our market research also shows that climate-conscious drivers are increasingly making decisions about their fuel purchases based on emissions, even at today's prices. For those drivers, biofuel like ethanol, it's not top of mind. We are able to give consumers exactly what they want, and shame on us if we don't capitalize on that opportunity to the fullest. Seizing on these trends, Growth Energy launched a pilot campaign last spring in just 2 markets, encouraging consumers looking to better the environment with simple changes to simply change fuel. We saw with our campaign a sharp increase in awareness and consideration at the pump, especially among a new generation of motorists who are motivated by the promise of cleaner, healthier air and who will change their fuel consumption to support these values. All they need is a nudge and unrestricted access to better fuel options. So we continue to educate, we continue to advocate. To get where we need to go as an industry, we need strong policy signals, and it is up to us to show the world what we already know. When it comes to competing on carbon, we win. We show it by asserting our climate bona fides over and over with sound science and accurate modeling to reflect your innovation. We show it by demonstrating that biofuels and farmers cannot be sidelined. If we are, all of America suffers. And thanks to the innovations underway by the leaders in this room, America's bioethanol industry is poised for success, delivering on a new wave of clean energy demand, on the ground and in the air, at home and abroad, in today's vehicles and tomorrow's. Thank you and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you, Emily. Great talk. And thank you for your leadership. You're poised at the helm of growth energy and everything you and your team are doing. Terrific speech. And great job just summing up what this industry is facing, what we've accomplished, and what's coming next. Really good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get in the weeds a little bit with our policy panel. Our association roundtable, cementing ethanol's place in tomorrow's low-carbon, high-efficiency transportation fuels. Guys, come on up. Please welcome to the stage Troy Bredenkamp from RFA, Bryan Jennings from ACE, Chris Bliley from Growth Energy, and our own Tim Portz, who will moderate this panel. Give these guys a warm welcome.
Morning, everybody. Tickled to be here. Last week it was my pleasure to speak with the gentleman before you, and during the call I noted that the call is actually maybe the best discussion because it's really sort of no holds barred. Everybody says what they mean, so my hope is that today we'll have the same level of candor. Let's start with a general one about the RVOs. 10 days ago, EPA finalized 2021 and 22 renewable volume obligations. Your respective organizations generally cheered the new numbers, and back on track was the theme and the commentary issued by ethanol supporters of all stripes. There were 4 separate actions issued or taken on June 3rd, from biointermediates to the denial of 69 different small refinery exemptions. Which of the actions on June 3rd are most worthy of our attention and why? And Bryan, we'll start with you, and then Troy and Chris will finish up with you.
Most worthy of our attention, I think, are likely, Tim, hopefully the final nail in the coffin of the small refinery exemptions. I think having this administration appear to turn the page entirely on the abuse that we saw previously under the, nearly 90 small refinery exemptions under the previous administration. That is a really important step, but we're going to have to remain vigilant. Obviously, the other one I would note is 2022, with 15 billion gallons on paper, anyway, for conventional biofuel, and the supplemental 250 million gallons from the lawsuit the 3 of us were involved in. But the last thing I would say is I think this begins to get the RFS back on track, but goodness gracious, we have to be vigilant. Mismanagement of this program has been the rule, not the exception, and so we got to make sure that EPA upholds those volumes and doesn't allow refiners, maximum compliance flexibility to escape their obligations.
How about you, Troy? What jumped out the page for you?
We're going to be very similar to what Bryan said. Certainly the denial of the small refinery exemptions, I think, points things in the right direction for the future. Second would obviously be the 2015 number at 15 billion gallons and the overall number of 20 billion, 6 and change. We had the opportunity to meet with Administrator Regan just a day or 2 before the actual announcement, and the indication he gave us was that he sees 2022 as a pathway into the set. So I think that's a good omen. It's a good indication where at least his EPA is pointed toward the future with this, which is a growth pattern, and it's certainly a welcome change over what we've seen over the last 4 years. So,
Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I just sort of batting cleanup here. I mean, it's exactly what these guys said. It's really the combination of the refinery exemptions and the strong 2022 number. We all talk about volumes. We talk about 15 billion gallons and 20 billion gallons. But let's also not lose sight of the actual RVO percentage. The RVO percentage for 2022 with the 250 million additional gallons is 11.73%. That means refiners have to blend 11.73% of what they produce in gasoline and diesel with renewable fuels. And so again, we always talk about volumes, and volumes are extremely important. But I mean, that is a very meaningful percentage. That is well beyond 10%. That's I mean, it's closer to 12 than it is 11. So that is a really strong signal going forward. Also, exactly to what Troy said and Emily said, it is a strong foundation for the set and beyond. It's really critical moving forward that not only that we have a strong volume, but it also sets a strong conventional volume. Because from here on out, you have the ratio of conventional to advanced, and both have to move in tandem to increase.
Well, never waste a good segue, right? I did want to talk specifically about sort of breaking out of this 10% box. Chris, you touched on it. We're up to nearly 12% inclusion rates. Talk more about the impact of that. Anyone that wants to jump in, Bryan or Troy, are we finally done with sort of this 10% box that we've been living in historically? And what comes next? 13, 14, obviously E15 sales, summertime help, and the efforts there to expand that. Talk more about getting out of the 10% box. Maybe we can start here with you, too.
well, I think there's a lot of things that would need to go into that. We're well on our way. You know, we've broken through 10%. We feel like we've been there for a while, but these new numbers are very positive moving forward. But it is going to take a concerted effort moving forward to make sure we keep that momentum going. It might be E15. It could be higher blends. That's going to require a smorgasbord of different policies coming together that help us drive those higher blends. It could be HBIP funding enhanced. We certainly need to look at the vehicles. You know, we've been focused on the fact that we're just not making flex fuel vehicles like we used to. There's a real demand for that right now, especially with the price spread. So we've got to work with our OEMs out there to get them building the vehicles that can handle higher blends once again. You know, there's just several things that are going to need to come together for us to not only break through that wall, but knock it completely down.
Any additional thoughts there? Go ahead, Bryan.
I would underscore policy is key. You know, newsflash, refiners aren't going to use our product unless they need to. I mean, left to their own devices, they don't want to see anything beyond E10. And so what policies do we have to create the incentives in the marketplace where we do move beyond E10? You were talking about this, Tim, in the context of the renewable fuel standard, and the concern that I mentioned earlier, I'll just sort of talk about a little more in detail. Look, on paper, 2022's renewable volume obligation is 15 billion gallons, setting aside the extra 250 million. But EPA's history here is to allow refiners to sort of hoard these RIN credits, right? Or they give refiners more time with which to comply with the RFS. All of these things enable refiners to meet their obligation with RINs as opposed to blending physical gallons of E15 and E85. And so we have to have these RFS volumes strong. We have to have additional policy, exactly like Troy said, whether it's HBIP incentives or new clean fuel markets. We always need to be driving forward with additional policy to enable us to move to these higher blends.
Well, I'll just touch on what Bryan said this is also a place where some of the states have taken leadership. You know, Emily talked about the biofuels access bill in Iowa. Additionally, as part of that, beyond sort of guaranteeing access, there's a strong tax incentive for higher blends. Nebraska has passed the tax incentive for higher blends. You know, Missouri, Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan has a hearing later this week. So again, exactly to what Bryan said, I think in Troy, it's additional policies. It's, continuing to do the blocking and tackling on market development with our retailers as well, but making sure that we're not undercut, but with vigilance at the federal and state level with existing policies. Because exactly to what Bryan said, you can have strong volumes, and previously we saw them undercut by refinery exemptions. We just don't want to see them, compliance deadlines that extend to, infinity and beyond. They need to be met, and they need to be met in a timely manner.
Points for Chris for a Buzz Lightyear reference there on stage. Thank you for that. Gasoline, $4.79 in the metro area right now. Certainly one of the biggest talkers in our economy right now, soaring gas prices. Yet somehow our opponents have figured out a way to twist that as a condemnation of ethanol and its inclusion. Who will consumers believe when it comes to the real story of the impact on gas prices of low-cost ethanol? And what can we do as an industry to really make sure that they hear the right message, they hear the truth about what ethanol can do and is doing to drive down gas prices?
I'll start. I think we need to hope, and every indication is so far that they are, but we have to hope that the consumers believe their eyes. Just look at the pump. Look at any marquee out there. Emily had 3 or 4 of them up there. We have a whole collection on our website. You've got E0, E10, E15, and if you find one with an E85 from California, you will see a $3 differential price. So people can say what they want to say, but I think consumers are realizing at the pump. I live in Northern Virginia. I, thank God, have sheets around where they're offering a 20 or 30 cent spread on E15. And there's a lot of people grabbing that blue hose right now simply because of that price point. So I think while there's a lot of chatter out there, there's a lot of misinformation, and it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. We really feel strongly that the consumer is going to believe what their wallet is telling them, and that is ethanol is a value. We also have been doing polling for years on a quarterly basis through Morning Consult, and everything in those polling numbers indicate that ethanol's support is strong. 2/3 support ethanol. When you add the value proposition into the question saying, hey, did you know ethanol on a wholesale level is $1 less than conventional fuel? Now what do you think of ethanol? That number goes above 3/4. It's almost 80% support. So we just need to be vigilant about getting the right information out there to the consumer.
Let's talk a little bit before we move on from the RVO, biointermediates. Biointermediates was one of the decisions handed down on June 3rd. It's certainly been intriguing for me, particularly when you think about some of the announcements that we saw on stage today about sustainable aviation fuels and this industry's role in that growing market opportunity. Talk about the impact of biointermediates and maybe help people understand how that's going to benefit the corn ethanol industry and what that might mean for corn ethanol producers. Anyone that wants to take a shot at it first, go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. I mean, so when the RFS was first put into place, and really the regulations as they existed sort of pre this RVO, EPA envisions feedstock and renewable fuel production all happening in one place. Chris Bliley ethanol, I buy my corn, I produce ethanol. As we move into more complicated, or not even more complicated, as we move into other markets, sustainable aviation is probably the primary one in this instance. You now have a system where our members and our industry are providing the feedstock for these fuels and not the actual fuel producers. EPA's regulations really didn't recognize that. They're concerned about, they want to make sure that renewable fuel is renewable fuel. And so there needs to be, a regulatory system that tracks it so there's not, fraud or abuse in the system. And so the biointermediates provision sets up a system that does exactly that, recognizes that this is a feedstock and basically that allows the train moving forward so that you're accurately generating RINs. RINs are accredited to the right people, and so forth. Is it perfect? No. And I think every regulation that's particularly new has its kinks that we'll work through, but most importantly, it does provide that growth moving forward, and does give people certainty that this is the way they can do it. It can be accurately done, and they can provide a very valuable market. I mean, the president's announced $3 billion for 3 billion gallons by 2030 for sustainable aviation fuel. We have a couple members that are committed, certainly an exciting announcement earlier. So it's really important for that path moving forward, and other fuels as well. It's not just aviation fuel.
Troy or Bryan, biointermediates, did it get some action around the office? People high-fiving?
Well, I mean, it's something we've been asking for quite a while, and now that it's in the program, albeit not perfect, it's still important. And I do think it will drive demand. When you think of what a biorefinery can do, it can do everything that a petrochemical refinery can do. Now we have really that open door to really utilizing, and in a RIN market system, be able to capitalize on that. So no, it's definitely a welcome addition to that program.
I think, as an observer, I think it's going to be a fascinating development. And I think that biointermediates is going to play a significant opportunity. Watch for it in the pages of Ethanol Producer magazine. I think it's going to be a big story for this sector. But let's move on to the big talker of the day. I joked as we rolled up on the FEW this year that we should set an over and under for the number of times carbon is said out loud and take action on the over and under. I think we could have probably had some brisk trade in that. But of course, we're here to talk about it, not bet on it. So carbon and reduced carbon intensity seem to dominate the landscape for our sector. Are our industry's low carbon ambitions and advancements, including carbon capture and storage, our best path forward for our next growth phase? Why or why not? We'll start down with you, Bryan, and just work this way.
I think so. I know not everyone does, but I do think carbon intensity is going to be the primary means by which we increase demand for ethanol in the future, but we've got to embrace it. And policy has to be done right. Carbon policy done right, climate policy done right, that's technology neutral, that uses, for example, the GREET model when it comes to life cycle sciences, greenhouse gas emissions accounting. It can both increase the value for ethanol and obviously increase demand. I mean, look at California's low carbon fuel standard, which is not exactly carbon policy done right. There are a lot of imperfections and problems with California's program, but over 1 billion gallons in demand annually, almost since the inception of that program. We did a study here in the Midwest. If a state like Minnesota or Nebraska implemented a clean fuel policy, who's the winner? And the winners are E15 and E85 as the low-cost way to get there. So we've got to get the details right. My colleagues and I have talked about this quite a few times, and it has to do with being technology neutral, not tilting the scales in favor of one electric vehicle technology over another, making sure that there's an apples-to-apples comparison when it comes to sort of life cycle analysis, and making sure that, these farming practices eventually get credited or rewarded in these policies. And then we're going to be the only fuel, folks, that can not only get to net zero, but that can get to net negative. So it's something I think we should embrace.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan said it well. It covered a lot of the key points on a carbon policy. The other point I would mention, and these two really have to work in tandem, you have to have availability of higher blends. Because if we're capped at 10%, as we are currently in California, I know we're all working to get to E15, it becomes almost a spiral. You have to combine the carbon policy with growth of higher blends. Because otherwise, you're just in a competing lower and lower carbon market. But yeah, no, it is the opportunity that we are playing in. It's certainly a huge priority for this administration federally, as well as a number of states that Bryan mentioned. I mean, certainly the West Coast is leading the way. Oregon has a program in place. Washington is in the midst of development. Nebraska, Minnesota, New Mexico. It provides tremendous opportunity for growth, has to be done right, and they're like all policies, you have to be vigilant in making sure that not only that policy is working right, but what are sort of the ancillary things that work in tandem, whether that's higher blends or FFV availability, that type of thing.
Troy, I'm going to pivot this question just a little bit to freshen it up for you. Yesterday during our Ethanol 101, your colleague Robert White noted that over 50% of ethanol production sites are either actively involved or have signed on to a carbon capture and sequestration opportunity. And I want to thank Robert for bringing that very fresh commentary to a presentation that he's given so dutifully, and I thank you for it, Robert, but it's always got fresh information like that inside of it. And is it your view, do you suspect that by the time this is all said and done 10 years from now at the 48th FEW, that carbon capture and storage is a reality across the sector, like, say, corn oil capture is so prevalent?
I won't necessarily predict it's across the sector, but it's certainly going to be a massive part of the sector. I mean, it just has to be. For the low carbon fuel standard type future, for the net zero future that we've all been talking about, even for sustainable aviation fuel, quite frankly, it has to play a huge part. And so those plants that are right now looking at carbon capture opportunities, I think they're doing the right thing. We're trying to make sure the policy in Washington, D.C. supports that. That's going to be very important from 45Q all the way to the modeling. Modeling is going to be very important. Bryan mentioned, the details are important, and they are. If we don't get the modeling right when it comes to low carbon, then it really doesn't matter, because ethanol won't be allowed to play in the game of a low carbon future or in sustainable aviation fuel. So there's so many moving parts that we all have to be watching. I would just mention that we, from an RFA perspective, we definitely believe in the low carbon future. Our board last summer voted to commit to a 70% reduction, and this is association-wide, a 70% reduction in carbon by 2030 and a net zero by 2050. So we're on board. It's going to, not saying 100% is going to do that, but they're all definitely looking toward that direction. They have to be. I think that's where the future lies.
A tremendous commitment from members of the RFA. Bryan, I want to come back to what you said about the low carbon fuel standard, because I got a question here about this patchwork of low carbon fuel standards that are out there. Some of them are imperfect. We all remember the indirect land use change calculations and how that really upset the apple cart for a bit for us. Is it time for a federal low carbon standard done right? Is that sort of the next play for our sector? Is there an appetite for that amongst your organizations? Talk about that.
Put me in the camp of we need more of a patchwork. And here's why. I don't think enough states have implemented clean fuel policy done right. And I think if we were to just pivot our attention to Congress right now and ask them to adopt a federal policy, they're going to look out to California and they're going to replicate the California low carbon fuel standard. And as Chris and Troy have talked about, that's going to be a problem for us folks overall. And so I want to see Minnesota adopt a policy. I want to see Nebraska, I want to see Renewable Fuels Nebraska and their colleagues succeed in getting something through the unicameral in Nebraska. Let's get some more common sense clean fuel policy in Midwest states. Then let's take a run at Congress and try to adopt something that's more like we see in the Midwest.
So Bryan's for patchwork. Anybody want to take an opposing view?
I'm just impressed a guy from South Dakota recognizes my home state unicameral and actually said it out loud. That was
it's the only one, my friend.
That is awesome. We are, it's states are the incubator of democracy, I think is the phrase, and that's I think what we're seeing. And so whether we think we can get a national policy or not, the fact of the matter is the states are going to do what the states need to do to move their policies forward with or without the federal government. we are working on a national approach. We are all exploring that opportunity. There's several in town that are working on it. Senator Durbin is kind of leading the charge on the Senate side, and I think he's a pretty good guy to be leading that. But it's got to be done right. We keep saying the devil's in the details, and Bryan mentioned, technology neutral. That is a word, that is a phrase we use constantly when we're talking about a clean fuel standard being done, because it cannot tip that scale toward one technology or the other. We just want an even playing field. We feel very comfortable that if the modeling is done right and the calculations are there and the efficiencies in the field and in the plants continue to improve, we are going to have a huge opportunity if that is a technology neutral policy. That's where we have to do a lot of work to make sure that happens. But I think you're going to see the patchwork first, but eventually I think you have to see probably a national policy come forward.
Yeah, Bryan brought up a really good point, because the modeling is also a patchwork. California and Oregon are different, and Washington quite literally said we are going to choose between California and Oregon. Canada is coming out with their own clean fuel standard, and they've got their own model. What we see in Minnesota or Nebraska is hopefully going to be different. And so, we know that we are a low carbon fuel. We know, GREET is the gold standard. But at the end of the day, you have a policy decision versus a science decision. And somebody has a desk that has to make a decision as to what is the yardstick. And if it's the right yardstick, we win. And if it's the wrong yardstick, it's tough for us. And it's critical. I mean, we've said it any different ways. It has to be done right.
Right. I got one more common question, then I've got a question for each of you, and then we're going to roll out and move on with the program. The next common question is about sustainable aviation fuels. And I just want to understand where you all stand on where ethanol is in that race. Do we have a position of advantage right now? Because again, we've got the deployed fleet of production facilities already. We've got partnerships, relationships. We heard about them today. Does ethanol have the inside rail to sustainable aviation fuel production, and are we likely to be the first contributors to really significant commercial volumes, whoever?
I mean, I don't know if we're, have the ultimate inside rail, but I know for our members, we've already committed to 20% of the president's goal. You have the volume, as you said, the ability to produce, the ability to provide feedstock. We now have a regulatory certainty with biointermediates. So it is certainly exciting. I think, and again, we all keep coming back to policies done right. I mean, Troy talked about it. One of the big fights we have had this year is making sure people understand modeling and how aviation fuel modeling is different than, on-road, and how GREET does a great job of doing that. But that's not the world of aviation modeling at the moment. And so it's really important that the policy be done right to make sure that all the things that our producers are doing and willing to play in this market can take off. Pardon the bad pun.
It's a good one, man.
Yeah.
Huge opportunity. It's a no-brainer. Again, done right. We've been having this conversation. I didn't even know what sustainable aviation fuel was 18 months ago, and it's just taken off.
We're sticking with it.
You both did it. It's an exciting opportunity, but again, we have to make sure that the science is there, that is doing the math right, things like that. One thing we have seen is a huge change in the industry that uses it, the airline, having Southwest up on stage. We're seeing partnerships bloom. And I think that's basically because when the first people who started talking about sustainable aviation fuel, they thought this was a opportunity to turn garbage into jet fuel. And there was a lot of people selling different things. And I think what the airlines saw was there's not enough feedstock available to do that. We have the feedstock. We have a low carbon feedstock that is going to be in abundance moving forward. They're excited about that. That's where I think these partnerships are coming, and that's why I think that future is pretty bright.
All right. As I said, I've got a question for each of you. Bryan, I want to talk about the efforts and focus that you and your team have put on the carbon implications of this industry actually reach all the way back to grain production. And you spoke passionately about it at last year's FEW, and I'm wondering if you can bring us up to speed on what ACE is up to regarding low carbon farming practices and how that translates into an even lower carbon produced ethanol.
Yeah, I think in addition to carbon capture and sequestration, it's getting credit for climate smart farming practices that does put us on a unique trajectory to get to net zero and net negative greenhouse gases, and we're not going to get there unless we do it. And folks in this room know this, but what happens in cornfields is responsible for half of your carbon intensity score. So in some ways you feel like, okay, is this beyond my control? I can add this technology to reduce energy or electricity use. I can reuse some of my energy. But what control do I have over what happens in cornfields? And right now, the inconsistency, right, is that the policymakers and the models will ding you, will penalize you for what happens in cornfields, land use change, fertilizer use, but they won't give you any credit for reduced tillage, which helps sequester carbon in the soil, or more efficient use of fertilizer, which reduces nitrous oxide emissions. And so at ACE, we're trying to overcome that hurdle, that inconsistency. The modelers tell us they think those practices do bring down ethanol's carbon intensity, but they need more statistically significant information with which to come up with a value for that. And so we've got a USDA grant that we're leveraging. We're working with Dakota Ethanol in Wentworth, South Dakota. We're going to pay farmers that supply corn to them to do certain practices, reduce till, more efficient use of fertilizer, maybe some cover crops. We're going to measure baseline sort of activities, and then throughout the 5-year program, do additional measurements, turn that data over to the modelers, and hope to sort of overcome that hurdle so we can finally get credit for some of these activities that happen on the farm, increasing the value and the demand for your product.
Important work. Thanks for doing it. Chris, yours is a bit of sort of a regulatory and administrative question. And I want you to unpack for us, if you can, how we ended up with a proposed consent decree that would require the EPA to establish 2023 RVOs by September, and I suppose RVOs into the perpetuity by September. And it seems like late arriving RVOs seem more the rule than the exception. And also, isn't there already rules governing the timely release of RVOs already? How is this consent decree different, and is it a good thing and worthy of our attention and our applause, I suppose?
Yeah, and so I'll actually talk about the previous consent decree for these RVOs and the 2023. Yes, there are timelines that EPA is required to meet. But unless anybody holds their feet to the fire, they're just that. And so in order to get to a consent decree, you have to bring a lawsuit. And so we brought a suit on the timing of the previous RVO because we wanted to get certainty out there. We wanted to get the 2022 RVO that we talked about earlier out there and finalized, and that was by June 3rd. Because we've seen what happens in the past is EPA does its work, it gets considered, and it sits on somebody's desk, and they think, you know what, I'm going to put this in a drawer until a better time. Or you just see a delay, and we needed the certainty out there for 2022. So we got it for 2022. We're in the same boat for 2023 and beyond. We need to see what those volumes are going to be, how EPA is going to set the first couple years of the set. And so, again, we brought litigation. Nobody likes bringing litigation, but we have to hold people's feet to the fire. And so it's really important that we have the proposed consent decree out there, we get it finalized so that we do see a proposal later this year, and then we get, the volumes finalized next spring.
Terrific. And Troy, last question for our discussion this morning. Last month, RFA publicly thanked Midwest governors for taking action to allow for year-round E15. Your press release also noted that these 10 Midwest states are home to over 50% of the country's E15 retailers. Is E15 a regional blend right now? And if so, what work remains to make it more common across the country?
Well, we certainly hope it's not just a regional blend. I mentioned I can get it in Northern Virginia. It is certainly gaining traction, especially with the price differential that we're seeing now at the pump. But like the LCFS issue, I think the states are going to take their own, they're going to control their own destiny, and we're seeing that with the 8 states and now 9. With the addition of Ohio. We're excited about this approach. You know, when we collectively lost the DC Circuit case last July, it was a big, oh, now what? You know, what are we going to do with E15? That provision has been in the Clean Air Act forever, that states can opt out of the program. So if we can't extend E15 or E10 waiver to E15, states can be more stringent and say, you know what, it's an improvement to the to air quality to lower the PSI 1 pound. That's what these 8 states and now 9 states are doing. We think it's an appropriate approach until we can get our collective national process moving forward. That's a challenge, either from a legislative or even regulatory. But we figure at some point, if you have states continuing to opt out of that program, and by the way, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, Oregon, Washington, you're on the clock. We expect those states to be looking at this hard as an option for those states as well. But at some point you hit a tipping point where either the EPA says, you know what, we're just going to change this program nationally, or potentially there could actually be a clean RVP solution from a legislative perspective. We see one kind of developing here late in this bill that's going to be up on the House floor on Thursday. We'll see where it goes, but it's an exciting time, and we're happy that these states are at least taking control of their E15 so that they can have that available to consumers in their states 2022 and beyond.
Gentlemen, once again, a brisk and fun conversation to be a part of. Thanks for having it be so informative. Please join me in thanking our panel this morning. Thanks, guys.
Great job, gentlemen. As always, these guys do just a terrific job with that policy panel. They deliver every year. That's why they're perennial favorites here at the FEW. As our associations work out all the X's and O's to build new markets for low-carbon ethanol and our co-products, our producers, of course, have to continue to innovate at the plant level to actually produce that low-carbon fuel and all the new products that we're aiming for. One of the companies that's leading the charge and has been for a number of years in that category, of course, is Green Plains. We have with us for the first time, I believe, on the FEW big stage, Todd Becker, CEO of Green Plains. I wanted to say real quickly before Todd comes out, back in January, I interviewed him. I had about 20 minutes with Todd on the phone and didn't really know exactly what I was going to ask him, but I had about 10 or 12 questions. I asked one question. I said, tell me about just a little bit about your total transformation at the company. I think he talked for the next 17 minutes, and I had a 2,000-word story about everything Green Plains was doing. It was like a reporter's dream. Todd talked about the renaissance of first-generation ethanol, everything they're doing: protein, oil, clean sugar, high-purity ethanol, sustainable aviation fuel, carbon capture, and the drive towards low CI. That was an actual quote from the story. I walked out of my office and I said, we got to get that guy to speak at the FEW. Please welcome to the stage Green Plains CEO, Todd Becker.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you, and thanks for that nice intro. That giving me too much credit. I often just talk for the sake of talking, but today, hopefully, I can tell you a little bit about our story and where we're heading as a company, and talk a little bit about the industry. And it is an honor to speak to you today, and obviously following some really great speakers with Emily and the panel, and with Bruce coming after me, I feel honored to be up here today. And while I'm expected to talk about what Green Plains is doing and what we're doing with our company, and I will do that, I would be remiss not to start out with a bit of the state of the state, where I believe we are as an industry. And anybody that knows me certainly knows I have strong opinions on things. I'm going to share some of those with you today, as I believe there are incredible opportunities that lie ahead of us as an industry. But I also think we're at a crossroads today. And where are we going to head with our assets? And what are we going to do as an industry? And what role will we play in the ever-growing need for low-carbon fuels and ingredients? And finally, what is our justification for doing these things? Because there always has to be justification, whether for our shareholders, our stakeholders, our families, our investors, our users, our consumers. And so today the industry, or historically actually, the industry had been relegated based on the technology that we had to produce low-value ingredients that we sell at a low price. And why should we accept that? We never believed we should accept that. And today we produce a low-carbon plant-based fuel whose impact on the planet I still believe is deeply misunderstood. And today we have a chance, unlike any other time in our industry's history, to redefine our stories. And each of our stories may be different, and each of our paths may be different to get there, but in the end I believe we can redefine ourselves and together redefine this industry. The opportunity we have in front of us to reinvent our industry to supply low-carbon, renewable plant-based biofuels and ingredients to the world is here. Demand for the products we produce remains strong, but we remain misunderstood and constantly under attack, as evidenced by some of the recent news reports and things that Emily talked about. As I have said many times, we crack open a kernel of corn to make 3 or 4 different products, while a wet mill cracks open that same kernel of corn and makes 200 different unique products, each with significantly better margin structures as they upgrade these products. And we no longer need to accept that as disadvantaged. But first I want to talk a little bit about carbon and decarbonization and the path for our industry. And the world is demanding something different for us. As a public company, we face that every day. Well, one of the things we know is that we can respond faster than many other industries in the world as the industry that we're in. Sometimes that's our nemesis, that we do it a little bit too fast, and the market's not ready for all the product that we can make, and we've seen that happen in the past. But sometimes that is also our advantage. And it's our advantage that we can make products that are in demand at high quantities better than anybody else in the world. And we already produce low-carbon products, whether it's plant-based biofuels like ethanol, low sustainable vegetable oils like distillers corn oil, low-carbon sustainable vegetable oil, or low-carbon protein ingredients through new technologies that can gain more and more value. So we're very different than what a wet mill does, but we can make a similar or even superior products more efficiently with a lower carbon footprint than those type of assets. But again, we need to be very careful. Our industry has a history of making something for the sake of making something and oversupplying a market. We need to be thoughtful in what we do, but this is something we must do. And when I say that, I mean it's going to be hard work, probably cost a lot more money than we expect. Our plants are all getting older, and it takes more to keep them going every year, and it gets more expensive, particularly with inflation and supply chain challenges. Talent is hard to find, spare parts are hard to find, construction costs more, materials take longer to arrive on your site and are much more expensive than they ever have been, as you could probably see every day in what you do. So we have to work through that to get to the other side, and the question we always have to ask ourselves is, are we ready for that challenge? So the decisions we make as an industry are not easy ones. The decision we have to make for our companies or our plants are even harder. Well, one thing I'd go back to is if you wanted to rebuild this industry today, it would be significantly higher in price than what we built in the first place. And that gives us the justification to invest behind these assets. And each of us have a different view on what that should be. Some of you will invest for ethanol yield. Some of you will invest in new products. Some of you will invest in expansions. And some of you will invest to make better products like we've talked about today. No matter what path you choose, I do believe this is the time in history for us to do that, because we're going to get paid for doing these things, and that's the most important thing, and that's by starting to reinvent ourselves. But Green Plains started out like everyone else. We built ethanol plants, we bought some ethanol plants, we sold some ethanol plants, we built some distribution. We tried to do a bunch of other things to diversify up and down the supply chain, but we kept coming back to one point all the time. We process a lot of agricultural commodities that can be made into products that create significant value. But as an industry in our early days, we were a technology taker, not a technology maker. But there's definitely a few visionaries that helped us along our path who put their money where their mouth is and went in all the time on this industry. Visionaries like the U.S. farmer, who raised billions of dollars to fund the growth of this industry, they put their money where their mouth is. And it worked very well for them. And now it's time for us to do the same. It's time for ethanol 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0. It's time for new visionaries to think about things like using our asset base for renewable chemicals, bioplastics, carbon sequestration, high-value proteins, lipids, dextrose, glucose, and so on. Those are the opportunities that are ahead of us. These are the visionaries emerging in synthetic biology, where the world is short fermentation capacity, and we possess a lot of that. So how do we monetize that as an industry? And I'm sure while you're here, you're going to see a lot of those opportunities, whether it's energy reduction projects, in situ fermentation, carbon sequestration, or capturing carbon to make other products. The future is absolutely to produce lower carbon intensity plant-based biofuels and ingredients. That's how we should talk about it to the world, in my view. Lower carbon intensity, renewable, plant-based biofuels and ingredients. It's time to reinvent our story a bit and at least do a better job of telling them what we have in the past, because you've heard it before, you've heard me say it before especially, and it's not very popular. We have been usurped by big oil, big food, and big auto, what I call the Holy Trinity, who created a false narrative about what we do, full of mistruths and lies. While it's nice to produce lower carbon fuels, our focus as an industry needs to be higher inclusion and blend rates, bar none, end of story, and I've said that many times in the past as well. At Green Plains, we partnered and we selected visionaries when we made an investment into Fluid Quip Technologies that helped transform our assets into modern-day biorefineries while working with the industry to provide technology solutions to operate better, cheaper, faster, and produce higher value products. We have to think differently in order to be successful. We need to attract talent to this industry that can manage these new technologies that we're all going to be putting into our facilities. It's no longer just turn on the dry mill and let it run every day. Yes, of course, that's simplifying it. These technologies that we're all talking about, whether it's alcohol to jet, 60% protein, getting the last half a pound out of the corn kernel of oil, making dextrose or glucose into renewable chemicals. They are innovative technologies, and we need to attract talent to this industry to help us accomplish that. And I don't know anybody that has a deep enough bench in the industry today to get there. And that's just the start of what we're going to do to make our modern-day biorefinery platforms successful. We need to think differently. We need to think differently about the people we want to attract to great paying jobs and great communities. In the age of COVID, our locations are now becoming attractive again for college graduates with engineering degrees, with technology degrees, with biology degrees. And to me, that's very exciting, and it's one of the first times I've been able to see that really since the inception of our industry. But we're at a crossroads of agricultural technologies at all of our plants, and we must realize the next 20 years will be very different than the last 20 years, and we need to keep up our skill sets with our employees as well. Where Green Plains focuses our efforts may be different than where you will focus yours, but I'm honored to tell you our story, and I'm excited about our journey, and hopefully you can get some inspiration on your own, for your own journey. Our story is about protein, oil, sugar, and carbon, or rather decarbonization. While we will still make a lot of fuel in the future, it'll be cleaner burning, lower carbon, and maybe zero carbon intensity after all the things we're going to do as an industry to reduce our footprint. I'll let others tell the story on the fuel side, but what I want to talk about are all the amazing things we could do with our processing facilities, or what I call our modern-day biorefineries. First, let me start out with corn fermented protein, a plant-based fermented pre-digested amino acid-based product and ingredient that we only as an industry can make, whether it's 40% protein, 50% protein, 60% protein, or even 70% protein. Each of these concentrations provide a significant larger margin opportunity. But we're in very early stages of these technologies, and we have to be very careful to protect our investment and achieve the real value of these products. It's not a commodity, and it should not be commoditized like some of our traditional customers would love us to do. This is the first time in history, or at least modern history, that there will be significant new quantities of plant-based proteins available for animal diets that can truly change how we make our food, being cleaner, more nutritious, and lower carbon. And what an amazing opportunity for this industry. But I guess there's also some skepticism, and I get it. Green Plains, we're spending over $500 million to install these systems at our plants, just as a starting point. But we're not just making high protein. It's about backing it up with science and technology and innovation around the product. So besides the money we're spending to build it, we have 3 innovation centers across our company whose main objectives are to show the global end user what this product can do for them, whether in aquaculture, pet food, piglet feed, and other uses. You just can't show up to the front door and expect to get invited in. We're spending tens of millions of dollars at Green Plains to back up Fluid Quip's MSC product development, and we're already seeing progress at a rapid pace. And we have great partners. Fagan is helping to build it. Novozymes is helping to inject nutritional solutions into our products through fermentation as it goes far beyond protein and protein concentrations. We recently announced an aquaculture partnership with Riverence. the largest trout producer in the Americas, who's going to use our high-quality 60% corn-fermented protein product as a cornerstone ingredient in its aquaculture feed. We have a partnership with a Japanese company called Hayashi Kani, one of the oldest aquaculture companies in the world in Japan, who have nutritional solutions that they can inject into our product to make salmon, tilapia, sea bass, trout, catfish, all of those taste better to the consumer. We are working on the yeast component of this product to inject biological solutions to this product to express certain amino acids and other nutritional solutions that the market needs. Remember, we're not just selling protein. We're selling a product with 25% yeast with the ability to tailor solutions specifically to the end user's needs. That's how we're thinking about it at Green Plains for this product. If you want to make 40 or 50 Pro, that's fine. It's not a set it and forget it proposition. That's not what protein is about. More specifically, in pet food, you can't just show up and expect to sell your product just because you have it. It takes years of audits and plant inspections and product usage trials to make sure your dog Fluffy receives quality, healthy ingredients. You are working with major brands who will never risk putting a new product in without significant understanding on who they're buying it from and where it's coming from, and ensuring there are internal redundancies that exist. In aquaculture, it's the same thing. You can't mess with an aquaculture diet. It takes 2 years to grow a salmon from an egg to market weight. To get new ingredients in that ration takes time and effort and science and technology. In one of our innovation centers, we have a university-scale aqua lab, which is one of the best in the world. That's what it takes to get into aquaculture. This is hard work, and I can go on and on with more stories. But when you think about new technologies in your plants, you also have to think about attracting the talent to run those new technologies. They do work, but they are hard and take time and effort and training. That's what we need to think about as an industry, and that's what we think about as Green Plains as a company. I won't spend a lot of time next on renewable corn oil, renewable distillers corn oil, but you all know the story. We possess a vegetable oil with half the carbon intensity of soybean oil. It's extremely valuable for the future of this industry. There are naysayers out there, and I hear it all the time, who claim that we will have to give up our ethanol margin and use corn oil as the offset, but we know that that's not true, and that's not the case. We are committed to extracting more and more oil value out of this corn kernel and oil. We get dramatically higher extraction rates when we implement our technologies. Our partners at Fluid Quip have the technology that can extract more corn oil, DCO+. But how are we going to extract that last half pound of corn oil? That's really the key. Somebody in this room is probably going to come up with that solution. Isn't that what the Fuel Ethanol Workshop is all about? Isn't that why we come here, to see those opportunities and those solutions of the future of ethanol? Seeing what's out there today and dreaming about the future of what we're going to do with our asset base. Speaking of the future, another opportunity that we're going to be implementing is clean sugar technology at our biorefinery platform. I want to talk a little bit about what does that mean and what opportunity is that. And when you look at a wet mill, they produce dextrose and glucose corn syrup and fructose and yeast and other very high value products out of that same corn kernel that we use every day. Well, we have technologies for dry mills that we believe we can produce glucose and dextrose for food and industrial use as well, and we're investing behind it at Green Plains to scale and to commercialize this technology. We announced Shenandoah, Iowa as the first full-scale clean sugar system. But why do we call it clean sugar? We often get asked that question from our investors and our customers. We do because our dextrose and glucose have a lower carbon intensity by 30 or 40% than what is produced in a wet mill. So think about it. When you're going to produce some new biochemical or bioplastic in fermentation and you need dextrose to fuel that, don't you want low carbon dextrose versus higher carbon dextrose from a wet mill? I would if I was making a new product for a world that is demanding decarbonization. Again, the reason we invested and partnered on this technology is because of the value of the IP portfolio and the expertise and the fact that we will invest behind that to prove out technology so they can be available on a broader scale. I won't spend a lot more time on this, but just to keep a few things in mind. The world is short fermentation capacity, but more importantly, they are short the fuel for fermentation, which is dextrose and glucose and sugar. Our view at Green Plains is in the next 10 years, we will double demand for these products, and the only place to get enough capacity will be our industry. Lastly, I believe our clean sugar technology, for us at least, is our single best solution that exists to reduce our carbon emissions out of our plants. Why is that? Because when you make dextrose, you don't make alcohol, and you're not using fermentation tanks. That means you're not emitting carbon. You're keeping carbon in the sugar molecule, much like we learned in high school, C6H12O6 as opposed to C2. H5OH, and I'm sure at this conference you appreciate that. And in doing so, we will by definition emit less carbon. That's our dream. But in the meantime, we will sequester our carbon where we can, whether on a pipeline or direct inject or into commercial product. That's how we will decarbonize our company. So to review, we are focused on protein, oil, sugar, and carbon. Decarbonizing our products are critical. I invite you to read our sustainability report, in which you can see what the world is demanding us to do as an industry, as a public company, and what we have to do. It's all laid out as a roadmap for where we're going. We have to focus on Scope 1 and Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. And other companies who buy from you will have to do the same, and they're going to demand that of all of us, and it is coming. They'll expect you to decarbonize where you can, but when you look at what is available to you today, and all of that is available to you in the future, we are in a complicated time, as these are not easy technologies to run and develop. But we must keep our eye on the ultimate prize. So in the end, I truly appreciate you listening, and I know that I don't have all the answers, nor do I ever say that to too many people, but I'm only sharing with you what I believe is right for our company, and that may not be right for you, and that's okay. But we're all heading down our paths, and it's the most exciting time that I've seen in this industry for what we're going to create in the next 10 years. Think about where we sit. 10 years ago, on the front of our annual report, what it said is we sit at the intersection between agriculture and energy. And maybe back then we were a little ahead of our time on that message. But I believe today, this industry, everybody in this room, our companies, all of our companies, sit at the intersection between agriculture and energy, and add to that food and bioproducts and decarbonization and alcohol to jet and next generation fuels and so on. So I'm going to leave you with a few statistics, which is what gives me the confidence to continue to invest, not just against my Generation 1 platform, but with the Generation 2 platform. Today, when we think about fuel demand, we all hear it's going to go away, but today there's 1.5 billion, over 1.5 billion internal combustion engines on the road globally, and there's less than 20 million EVs on the road, on those same roads. Do you think we have a future in low carbon fuels? I do, and that's why we continue to be very excited about what the opportunities that lie ahead of us as an industry and as a company. The second thing I always look at is when I think about what these plants are capable of, I look at just one opportunity that has been presented to us, and it's about bioglycol, the things that make antifreeze, or glycol that makes antifreeze. And if we produce bioglycol as an industry, which is going to be coming, I believe, in the next 10 years, and we'll substitute petroleum-based glycols, and we use our clean sugar to do that through fermentation, which is coming as well. If the whole industry, everybody in this room and so on, converted every dry mill ethanol plant just to produce dextrose and glucose and sugar, we can only satisfy 20% of the global glycol needs. That's correct. Just 20% of global glycol demand can be satisfied if we converted every one of our ethanol plants just to produce dextrose. That is a huge opportunity, and that tells me what we're doing today is very valuable. And the assets we all own today need to be cared for, invested in, and upgraded over the next 20 years. I truly believe that a renaissance is coming for our industry and our companies, and we stand ready to provide the feedstock for the bio-revolution that is coming and for the bio-revolution that is here. Thank you very much for your time. It's been an honor to speak to you today.
Thank you, Todd. Really appreciate you coming to the FEW. You know, we are making changes constantly here at the FEW to try to improve our programming. One of the things we want to do is provide insight like that. I told Todd and his team that we were looking for sort of a TED Talk on ethanol and what they're doing, and he provided exactly that. We really appreciate him coming. Finally, folks, today we're going to close out our general session seminar with kind of a recap of one of the more exciting things happening in the carbon capture world. Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you know, carbon capture and sequestration, especially CCS, that is involved with pipelines and aggregating CO2 from many ethanol plants, is one of the more exciting things happening in our industry and could take us to another stratosphere in terms of the potential to lower our carbon intensity scores. One of the companies that's truly leading the way in this area is Summit Carbon Solutions, and we have with us the CEO of the parent company of Summit Carbon Solutions, Summit Agricultural Group CEO, Bruce Rastetter. Bruce, you're going to close out the general session at the 2022 FEW. You can take whatever time you need, but we really appreciate your presence here. Come on out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO of Summit Carbon Solutions, Summit Agriculture Group, Bruce Rastetter.
Well, thank you, and it's really a great opportunity to be here, and really appreciate the opportunity to follow Todd and his vision of the industry and how you create more protein and more products out of ethanol and as part of decarbonization. But I think one of the things as I thought about today and think about agriculture and the opportunity that we all have that involves a broader set of thoughts and issues around ag, it's maybe to step back a little bit and think about where agriculture has come from, where biofuels have come from, and that opportunity that exists today to take it to the next level and the next generation. And I can't help but think of seeing a number of you that saw today earlier and last night that have a similar background I have, growing up on small farms and seeing the change that we've seen over our lifetime that really involves the embrace of science and technology to produce more with less, which is truly the definition of sustainability, and in my mind, lowering carbon scores and creating a cleaner, healthier, more productive world that we're responsible for in terms of food production, energy production, and the rest of that. And so as we think about that, in just a short lifetime of that embrace of science and technology and what it's done, I couldn't help but think about when I grew up on a small farm, and my father had a John Deere B with a 4-row plate planter that planted about 25 acres a day. And you fast forward to today, on that same farm, we plant the corn with a high-speed quad track that goes 11.5 mile an hour, 90-foot platform that plants 75 acres an hour, or 750 acres a day compared to 25 acres a day back then, and plants high population corn at 45,000 plants per acre compared to 24,000 plants per acre then. And that efficiency of the embrace that agriculture's always done on embracing science and technology to produce more with less is really the true definition of decarbonization and in creating a better world. And alongside that, having a background in pork production, thinking about how pork production and protein production have continued their investments and increases. When we started in the pork industry years ago, we would produce pork at about a 4-to-1, 4 pounds of grain to a pound of lean pork. Today, a lot of companies are doing 2.5 to 7-to-1. Chicken, the same thing has happened. Beef, instead of 7-8-to-1, has gone 4.5-to-1, producing more lean meat through the improvement and investment in improved genetics, improved feeding technologies, nutrition, that clearly ethanol has been part of. And so as we think about all that, and also I think about as we go about our process of working with 32 ethanol plants, 20 companies across 5 Midwestern states to help decarbonize and lower their carbon scores, the responsibility we all have as leaders in agriculture to do the right thing at a transformative industry that's created huge economic opportunity for agriculture. And if we fail at this, we really have to look in the mirror and say, what did we do to agriculture with record land prices, record grain prices, and the opportunity that exists in rural America today because of ethanol? So as I think back on my career, and part of that career being in ethanol, and building a plant in Iowa Falls, Iowa in 2004 in the early stages of ethanol, I can't help but remember a farmer that was in his mid-70s at the time that said that in the 50-some years of farming, that was only his second year of profitability without government subsidies. It's because suddenly, instead of an export market, he had a domestic market for his corn nearby to not be loaded on a shuttle train and shipped overseas to the vagrancies of those markets, but to add value locally to those products as biofuels has done. And so with that, an industry that grew from a cottage industry back in the early 2000s to now not just the marginal consumer of corn, but 45% of the U.S. corn crop goes into ethanol. And a portion of that back to livestock feed that will be created with higher protein, higher quality products going forward because of the technology. I can't help but also think about the leaders in the industry that have helped do that. to make sure that we continue every day to produce more with less, more gallons of ethanol per bushel of corn, higher protein and higher oil products, but in particular then with that, because of the economic boom that ethanol has created for agriculture across this country, and the profitability on farm that has allowed investments to happen in technology and equipment like what I just mentioned, as well as seed companies investing in new products and technology, increased seed production, that lowers the carbon footprint by producing more with less with sustainability. And so as we thought about that background in the agriculture, ethanol, in particular some experience we gained in Brazil, that when we went there with ICM and built Brazil's first modern corn ethanol platform, Brazil had remained part of the Paris Climate Accord. And with that climate accord, had to have a sustainability score on every gallon of energy it produces in the country, not just ethanol, but everything. And coupled that experience with a company called Unilever in Europe a few years ago, talking about very soon they will have a CI score on every product they sell in their chain, which is 800,000 products. So consumers will know what the CI score of that product is. And maybe some of us that are a little bit older have been slower than some of the young guys that I employ at embracing that. And I coupled those two opportunities with one of our investors, been really successful, and sent me an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the kids of baby boomers that are going to inherit trillions of dollars over the next decade. Their number one goal is to invest in sustainability. And how do we make a cleaner, greener world? And Bill, is his name, said, you know, Rastetter, at the end of the day, my kids are just like those kids. And in that article, it said that they really didn't care if those investments made money, but they wanted to take that wealth that they inherited and make the world a better place. Well, I would suggest to you, across agriculture, across ethanol, across the 32 plants, 20 companies that we work with, that opportunity exists in a greater way for agriculture to do it today than it's ever done it before any other industry has. And of those 800,000 products that Unilever buys, a significant portion of them are ag-related. And ethanol, because of its role and responsibility, moving from a cottage industry to 10 to 15% of the U.S. fuel supply, has that opportunity, but also the technology to lead with that. So as we thought about things we cared about in terms of agriculture, rural communities, ethanol, biofuels, what makes the most sense when we look at carbon intensity scores that ethanol has worked very hard at to lower over the inception of number of you building plants and doing things today. And so that score, as we know, has gone from the initial industry of a 99 to about a 55, 60 for a number of plants. It varies where they're at in location. But if you think about sequestering CO2, taking it off fermentation, putting it in a pipe, shipping it to what we believe is the most friendly state in the country in North Dakota, to do it at, it's proven technology, it cuts that carbon score in half. So an industry that has worked decades to make those improvements from 99 to 55 suddenly can go to a score of 25. And the reason companies like John Deere, TPG Rise, the world's leading sustainability company, infrastructure funds like Tiger, and I'll talk a little bit about the investment from an oil gas company called Continental Resources that reflects the most innovative guy in that industry, in that space today, a guy by the name of Harold Hamm. Why we're able to combine them is they know if we're going to save the combustion engine, we have to work together to lower carbon scores. And I know this organization and Growth Energy that I was part of, oftentimes we've knocked heads with those guys. And because as we've grown from a cottage industry to a significant portion of the fuel supply, that's natural. But at the end of the day, it's too important for agriculture, too important for the combustion engine, and everything we care about, and 50% of the U.S. corn crop, that we not work with them to lower the carbon intensity score of the gas tank and the liquid fuel that goes into it to make that happen. But I would suggest to you, beyond agriculture, how important it is for society. The unintended or intended consequences of electric vehicles are yet to be talked about and seen in a dramatic way, but that's beginning. And you're beginning to see signs of the challenges of electricity production from renewables that dramatically raises electrical costs in states and in places that do that. And electric vehicles will not be kind to the average energy bill of an American that has to buy electricity in their home, apartment, their car, and uproot the very opportunity they have. And yesterday there was an announcement by Smithfield, the world's largest hog company that has 42 plants in the U.S., that they're closing a California plant because electric costs have gone up 3.5 times higher per pig that they process there than in any other plant they have in the country. And so if you think about, if we truly believe as a country that we have to go to electric vehicles to get more sustainable, the cost to society is going to be horrific with that, and there's no reason to. We can have our plants in this industry that cuts its carbon score in half today, and with the other improvements going on in ag, go to a net zero carbon fuel within a decade. And if you think about that opportunity at higher blends of net zero carbon or even negative carbon fuel, because we know corn production is going to increase, Summit Carbon Solutions is talking to fertilizer plants, and there will be some that will be either on our system or other systems, that will lower the carbon score on every unit of nitrogen produced at those plants, and Iowa has 3 very large ones that provide the majority of the Midwest nitrogen, that will lower the carbon footprint on that farm of corn production that goes to the ethanol plant, that will allow that ethanol plant to buy lower carbon corn, lower its carbon score that California and other states will take into account and be able to accomplish. I think the other aspect of it that we're focused on, and we're focusing the team at Summit Carbon Solutions on, is how do we participate with that beyond just taking CO2, which is relatively easy, getting all the permits and right away, and all that may not be, and we need to make sure our companies focus on being farmer friendly, because we do pass farms that are privately owned, that are important that we respect their land, their tile, and their investment that they have in that, and we are, and continuing to make headway on right-of-way on that 2,200 miles of pipeline in every state. We have a Class 6 well, one of 3 in the world, that we've signed a leading agreement with Minnesota, the power company in North Dakota, so we don't have a question or an issue of sequestering that CO2 in great geology. And we happen, as an aside, to think North Dakota may be a little more friendly business state than Illinois, and has studied that geology for decades. And so we think that's an advantage for Summit Carbon going that direction, and will put us in first position about 3 years earlier, which is really important for our partner plants to have that and develop that. But beyond that, how do we do that with agriculture on-farm carbon sequestration programs that make sense? So we have a team, as some of you heard, Ben was on a committee and a roundtable yesterday talking about that, and we think there's a lot of programs out there and there's a lot of opportunity, but also because we farm, we know that there are unintended consequences of cover crops, of those things that can sequester carbon in the soil, so we have to be thoughtful about it. But companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, who all said they're going to be net carbon neutral within a period of time, have publicly announced that. The only way they can do that is by buying carbon offsets. They can, around the fringes of their energy consumption, do something. I understand some of them are already concerned about the cost of wind and the intermittency of that, but we can help them with programs on farm with your plants, farmers, that touch, in our case, in our system, 41 million acres of upper Midwest farm ground. That what I would suggest in our lifetime, every acre of that farm ground will have an opportunity to carbon sequestration program paid by voluntary credits to those farmers for changes in practices that will lower the carbon score of all the products produced on the farm, improve the environment, which as we lead in 45% of the corn crop sent to ethanol, we have an responsibility, I think, to do, that will help on-farm income go to the next generation as well. So as we think about that opportunity to match voluntary credits with credits in California for the lower the carbon score, and soon to be all of Canada and other states that will pass that, we think about what the competition is for the combustion engine. And as Todd mentioned, there's about 1.5 billion combustion engines around the world, and they aren't going to go away anytime soon. And I would suggest if this industry starts talking about how we can go to a net zero carbon fuel, and we start asking questions that what is the CI score of electric vehicles, or some of my friends say virtue vehicles, what is their carbon score? They really don't know, because it depends on where the minerals come from, and we know where the minerals come from and the dependency that this country will have on lithium and other mining operations in Africa and China. We know that the carbon score and the environmental impact will be much higher and much more negative than biofuels. That's helped clean air around this country and created an opportunity that didn't exist before to take that science and technology in each plant that a number of you are associated with and improve the efficiency across the board that lowers the carbon score. So I think we'll have an opportunity as an industry to start talking about that, to start talking about those increased corn yields and having a net zero carbon fuel and how important that is to consumers and the country and the environment long term and our economic health of rural America that we've never had an opportunity to talk about before. So today, our project is, and there's different thresholds along the way that have become challenging. We first had to get critical volume to be able to do this and make it financeable. So I want to make sure I'm not remiss in not thanking the 32 plants, 20 companies across the 5 Midwestern states that have signed up with us early to do this. Because they took a chance. The 1, we'd be able to raise the capital. 2, we'd be able to accomplish this. And 3, we would not have aversion to farmers wanting us to go across their land. And in today's world, that's not a simple process. But if you pay fair value and you treat people right, you can have good outcomes. And so we are. Today we have, of the 700 miles in Iowa, we have over 30% of those miles signed up on voluntary easements. We're on a similar pace in the other states. We intend to try and have voluntary agreements rather than the use of eminent domain, although those laws are important and all the infrastructure we have in the U.S. revolve around that. But we think it's really important to work with farmers on placement, on tile, on depth of the pipeline, and how important it is that with every other row of Iowa corn going to ethanol that we keep those markets and we make those plants more profitable by lowering their carbon score and being able to sell into those markets. So as I mentioned, we also have the critical part of this is you have to have a place to sequester the CO2. And so North Dakota has studied that geology for decades. They're one of 2 states in the country, Wyoming being the other, that has primacy over Class 6 wells. And we know the geology works. We've signed up the long-term easements for multiple wells, and we have an agreement with Minnesota to do that, and to do that 2 years earlier than what it would take if you started out fresh. So the project, $4.5 billion, we've raised over $1 billion, and as I mentioned, from a diverse group of investors. We have over $300 million raised from RLPs and ethanol plants that are part of the project, that have skin in the game and an important part of the investment because they believe this is their future. We've also combined a sustainability fund that Hank Paulson leads that does worldwide investments in sustainability. And as I mentioned, Continental Resources that is founded and led by Harold Hamm, who has significant experience in the Balkans on directional drilling, believes that it is really important for the combustion engine that oil and gas work with biofuels so we all have a future. And back to my earlier comment, that's different than most people might think about because we've said things about them, they've said things about us, but at the end of the day, we have much more in common because we aren't going to have 100% of that fuel tank. In working with companies like that want to innovate, that want to embrace new concepts, new ideas to do this. And so that's why we're excited about Harold Hamm and Continental Resources teaming with us that can help change the politics of what we do, which as I look around, and certainly in Iowa, we support Senator Grassley's reelection. But Senator Grassley is also 88 years old. And as he told me, as he thinks about decarbonization, in the last decade, this industry's lost a lot more battles than we've won. And in this instance of lowering carbon scores, we can win the battles in the future because we're aligned with sustainability like all of us have always believed we've been, but also taking it to the next level to compete very directly with electric vehicles because certainly in our world, they are the competition for both oil, gas, agriculture, and ethanol. And we can lead that and we can face that directly. And then with that, all the other products that we produce in ethanol plants can help produce a zero carbon pork product. And the companies we work with are talking about that. In the future, if they buy DDGs and they buy high protein that has a lower carbon score, and they continue to do the efficiency things that that industry and others are doing, they can do that. But back to, we have become the largest, we have become the most important, in my view, for agriculture, and we can do this. So I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here today. We're excited about our project. We're continuing to make progress. We look to have CO2 in the ground in the summer of 24. And we're on a pathway to do that. And we're excited to help lower in half the carbon footprint of every ethanol plant we work with. And a surety that we're going to do the right thing on the farm because of our ag background and working with those farmers to have a minimal impact long term on what we do there. So thank you. I appreciate being here.
Hey, thank you, Bruce, for helping us close out this 38th annual session of the FEW. Just a real treat and privilege to see the future of our industry and the future of carbon sequestration from your unique and experienced vantage point. So thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Todd, as well. And thank you all for joining us for this 2022 general session. It's been a real great show, and we've got another 36 hours left. Enjoy the rest of the FEW. Our sponsor of our lunch is HK Solutions Group. Lunch is being served in the Expo. The Expo Hall is open. Technical sessions, I believe, begin at 1:30 and run for the next day and a half. Enjoy the show, everyone. Thank you.